when does the self dissolve? We're like the cells in between, or the cells that I have, the skin cells, right? Mm-hmm. They're connected somehow, even though they're really not connected in the way that, say, like a bacteria is connected to another bacteria, right? Those are two different cells.
Oh,
bacteria,
I see what you're
right?
saying.
But like, what am I in this sense? If I'm just like these individual cells.
Yeah. So at some point in evolutionary history, cells decided that it would be easier and more efficient to work together towards a common goal.
Right. And there's no self in that. But what you and I are doing right now, I'm shooting signal from my mouth.
Yeah.
Sound.
Yeah.
Sound energy.
Yeah.
Into your ear balls.
Right. My ear balls.
Yeah,
yes.
Your ear balls detect. You know,
do I have big ear balls?
Yeah, you have big ear balls. Yeah, you get some balls. Some Italian balls. And those meatballs,
Yeah, that's
those
right.
Italian meatballs are detecting sound, which translates to energy.
Yeah.
And or to bioelectricity in your brain, which goes to all the cells in your body. So you and I are connected right now, almost.
Oh, I see your
as
point
an
now.
entity, as a single entity. Like the signal that one skin cell has to one another in my own body is analogous to my connection with you by sending signal.
I think it's analogous. I don't think it's the same, but I think it's analogous. Yes. I think there is a inherent connection that your cells have that I do not have with you, right? I can't feel what you're feeling right now. I can get some of your signal, but not all of it.
But same with the cell.
True.
Right?
True.
They only determine from
they're on a need-to-know basis.
Yeah,
all
it's
the cells.
by like a certain amount of like whether it's ions or how much charge is outside, or it's not by this exact understanding of one another.
Yeah. And then conversely, the cell's not relaying all of its information to the brain, right?
Just enough
Yeah.
for fitness later on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a job, right? It's like whatever goes on in your office, you don't report everything to everyone, right? You're like, oh, I just dropped my pen. Like that's not going to get transduced to anyone else, right?
But then if we're connected in the same way that my cells are connected to one another, analogous, may not be the same, but it's analogous, then we are part of this one consciousness.
I agree. I think that there's something to that. But explain to me how a rock does that.
Because we're connected in the same way. There's a visual signal on
No,
that
you
rock.
and I, yeah.
That rock existing itself on Earth is a part of a connection.
So vicariously,
yeah.
It's experiencing because we're experiencing it.
Yes, yes, exactly. Its existence creates a mental model in ourselves that is a necessary part of the world and our own connection with how we interact with it.
Okay.
And if that's part of consciousness, then the whole thing's part of.
Okay. The universal model exists but what about when there is no consciousness around? What about a star that we can't even observe somewhere in the distant part of the universe? How do you connect it there?
I don't think there's consciousness there. I think it's consciousness when you have,
there's like a web of consciousness, basically.
Yeah, I think it's only when it's connected. It's interesting because like, is something more conscious if it's experienced more, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. So I think you're more conscious than a planarian.
Because it experiences more and it expresses more.
Yes.
What about like works of art, like Shakespeare?
Oh, the work of art itself?
Yeah, so like a work of art, does it have consciousness? Because it holds inside of it a person's mind.
I see. It's like a photograph of consciousness.
Yeah.
It required consciousness to make, and art is special in that it holds a piece of a person's mind.
Yeah.
Whereas
it's
a
signal,
chair,
right?
you could argue a chair does too. Someone designed this chair.
Yeah.
Right.
Architecture, any kind of thing that is created by man, it effectively has a human mind working on it, human touch.
Okay, I can buy that. I think that's, but the chair doesn't experience anything.
No. It's like a median. It's like the sound waves that I'm shooting off to you.
Yeah.
Right. It's indirect consciousness.
Right.
But it needs consciousness to create.
Okay. Yeah. So Nick and I both. Well, I didn't watch all of it, but I've listened to this podcast before in entirety. And I think you've listened to it a few times since then because it's a really good one.
I listened to maybe like 3 times. It's a Lex Friedman podcast with Michael Levin.
Yeah, 325 is the number if anyone wants to look it up.
It just makes me like makes me nervous.
All right, you have to qualify that.
It gets me going, man. it makes me think like how chaotic everything is, and like the evolution doesn't give a shit. It just tries to figure it out, and then what you experience right now is effectively just part of that one game of.
I agree with you that it's chaotic, but I also think there's what those planaria show. There are solid local rules that exist, algorithms that exist in nature.
Yeah, and if you go so atomic to the cell level, it's like everyone's playing its own game.
Right. So one of the first things he talked about in the podcast, he took like a collection of cells, early stage, took one of them and kind of separated it, and that thing became its own organism. Like it had no other local rules around it. And Dawkins talks about this in the Selfish Gene. Local rules is embryology. Like it's all about local rules. The cells around you dictate what you're doing. Kind
it's
of
like
thing.
The game of life is like that. Or the John Conway's A Game of Life, where each pixel is determined by the rules of the previous frame.
Yeah. But the wild thing about that is not so much the algorithm for me. It's the fact that you are compiled of separate organisms. Essentially, when you break it down, when you use that bacteria thing in the beginning of when we start talking, it's essentially there's a solid truth behind that. In that our human cells work in concert because of local rules, but when they're removed from each other, they go rogue, right? And they even evolve things. Like he said, these what did he call them? Xenobots. Xenobots start evolving their own answers to questions over time.
Right. If I think his obsession with the Xenobots is if you can program something that is highly adaptable towards a certain goal, it's better than having hard program certain solutions, right?
Yeah.
So if you have like, hey, attack a certain antigen, right? Like if you have a virus or cancer or whatever, attack all cells with this antigen or whatever. There could be dire consequences when it comes to such a pan kind of thing where you're not quite sure what the second order effects are. But if you can have an organism that tries to keep the system alive, it can kind of figure out through evolution, through adaptation, how to solve that problem.
Yeah.
Instead of, hey, just do this one thing. And that's what we are effectively. These xenobots, we're just
highly concerted xenobots.
Yeah.
And to tell you what, cancer is the opposite of that. Cancer is going rogue at the multicellular level. Like you're already multicellular and that cell goes rogue. That's one of the first, and then it incorporates other cells around it, and it becomes a competing organism within yourself. That's what cancer is. It's a parasite.
But it's satisfying its own goals. It has right.
Yeah.
It's
trying to survive.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's game theory, right? It made the choice that the whole entire organism isn't part of the goal. It
didn't make a conscious choice, but yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a local optimization, right?
It's local optimization that started from a mutation. So the mutation's random, or introduced by
genetic.
Or smoking, extracellular signals, right?
Right.
So, but once that spark is ignited, it's like I have to live. I have to proliferate, and that's what cancer actually is. It's an organism inside of you.
Yeah, and it's like it makes you think, what are you, right? What are you?
That's why I started the podcast off with that question. Like, what is self, right?
Right.
Judging by the Xenobot thing, that's why I came to the kind of conclusion sitting in that room. Like, there is no self in my mind. Like,
but then is everything the self? Because you and I are the same. Are you and I just part of the same, whatever cancer or whatever local optimization of a larger organism? And I think if you want to think that way, it definitely is, including the rock on the ground, including the sun that we could barely see, or the star that we could barely see.
Maybe it's because we're social animals, we think.
All right, give me an example of
a lone wolf.
Yeah, but the lone wolf requires interaction with other species to survive and whatnot.
Correct. It requires interactions to eat other animals.
Yeah. It's
plants.
Still part of the world. Yeah.
Okay, I see. So you're saying there's a cosmic narrative, and we're all kind of like playing our part towards that?
It freaks me out because there's no the cell has no its local optimization. The cell has its own local optimization and its programmed rules based on survivability of a larger thing that has very like the cutoff point of what a physical entity is based on, I guess, this thing called the gap function, where the proximity of a cell to one another determines the border, the contour of an individual. Yeah. But the contour of the individual is, well, it's a chaos within it, but it's also like a thing that interacts with the world, and the world itself is part of that consciousness, because then you're not anything.
So the dominionization of the self actually for you expands the self. So the act of like creating these single units that have their own ideals, which are muted by local rules, but they still have their own ideals. The fact that that exists makes you actually more expansive because of that. It sounds like. It
makes me think I'm experiencing a very small contour of a larger organism.
Yeah.
Because like it's arbitrary, my cells and your cells. We're just separated by space and signal. But you and I are still talking to each other, interacting with one another with energy, and we share resources.